Since you're a person of interest, let me ask you this. Did you do something with her?
No.
Did you kidnap her?
No.
Did you sexually assault her?
I did not.
Did you murder her?
I did not.
Did you murder her?
I did not. I did not.
Nodding yes while saying no is usually a telltale sign that someone is lying. In this particular case, the suspect is trying to clear his name during a news segment on live television.
She chose to walk off with this guy, and I can't blame myself for that. God, I'm sorry.
He lied. It was in his demeanor. It was in his body language. It was all there.
When the pressure is escalating, another tactic commonly used is to feign ignorance.
What's her name?
Kenya.
Kenya, yeah.
19-year-old Kenya Monhe, kidnapped, assaulted, and ultimately murdered, was the first official victim of the Bleach monster.
The house smelled of bleach.
He did quite the job with the bleach.
I've watched enough, true crime stories and whatnot, but Bleach means something.
True to his namesake, the killer never left any traces of his crimes behind, cleaning everything thoroughly, forcing detectives into an endless game of cat and mouse with him.
He said, "What do you think of me?" I said, "I think you're a creep. I think you're a jerk. I think you're a monster."
For over 6 months, the Denver police struggled to find any tangible evidence against him, until he struck again. But his next victim survived, and took it upon herself to make sure he wouldn't be able to hurt anyone ever again.
She's really kind of the hero of stopping him, because without her, I'm not sure we would have ever found Kenya, frankly.
In the infamous city of Aurora, just beside Denver, Colorado, ambitious 19-year-old Kenya Monhe is getting ready for a well-deserved girls' night out after a long week of work and studies.
When I was talking to her that day, I just thought it was going to be a regular night for her. She was going to go out and then she was going to tell me about the night the next day.
But the next morning, Kim didn't receive any calls from her. Instead, Kenya's boyfriend reached out to her.
I answer the call and he's like, "Hey, have you heard from your sister?" "No, why? What's going on?" And he's like, "Well, she didn't come back home last night." He was like, "Yeah, the girls that she was with, they don't know where she's at either."
She immediately called her father, Tony Lee, to share the alarming news with him.
When I got my call from my daughter Kim and she said that she had not heard anything from her that day, that's when I went into high alert.
Tony then hung up on Kim and immediately called Kenya's friends.
She had left her purse and phone and her ID and all that stuff in the bar.
He was just like, "Okay, let me call the police." She was 19, so that's considered an adult.
In the state of Colorado, the law prohibits any actions to be taken or warrants to be filled before the end of a mandatory 72 hours waiting period.
So, got off the phone and I was pissed.
My dad's like, "That's not good enough. I need to know where my daughter is."
Without the authorities' support, Tony Lee took it upon himself to investigate her disappearance.
I'm going through her phone and her friends were sending her messages trying to get in contact with her, and she's not responding to it at all.
And we see a text message from this guy named Travis.
And the message said, "Hey, this is Travis, the guy in the creepy white van, smiley face. Did you get home okay?"
For the rest of the day, Tony kept calling everyone. The only person he couldn't reach was Travis.
I kept calling him. I kept leaving these messages. I must have called that phone number 20, 25 times over the next 24 hours. It got to the point where I was not calling any of her friends anymore because I felt that this person seemed to have been the last person who had seen her.
The next day, 48 hours after her disappearance, the phone finally rang.
And on the night of April 2nd at about 8 p.m. is when I got my first call from Travis Forbes. And he told me the story. "Oh yeah, I've seen her out there. Asked her if she needed any help because, she seemed like she was really out of it, So I said, "Oh, well, I better help her." So, she got in my van.
Travis then went on to tell Tony what, according to him, happened that night. After he picked her up, she asked him to stop by a gas station. There, she saw a man smoking a cigarette in the distance and left the car to go see him. Travis then explained that he left her there with the stranger.
That's what he said. It's the last he saw of her. And I got off the phone and I thought to myself, that is the most fantastic story I've ever heard. Not one word of what he told me made any sense to me.
Tony started to boil inside. Even if he was sure Travis was lying, there wasn't much that he could do without the police's support. But he didn't mind risking his own life if it meant that he could save his daughter.
I'm pissed. I'm just sitting there, it's like, I can't believe this. So I took matters into my own hand. I called Travis back. And I said, Travis, I got some questions I want to ask you. Tell me again where you last saw her at. And he said, tell you what, why don't you meet me there? I told him I'm on my way. I grabbed a 9mm pistol. I packed it in my waist. And I told her, I'm on my way to meet this guy. Maria was begging me, Tony, don't do this. Don't go down there. This is dangerous. This don't sound right. I told her, I gotta go. They're not gonna do anything. Gotta go.
My mom, she knows my dad, so she calls the police and she goes, you need to meet my husband right now because he's meeting up with this man and I don't think it's gonna end well.
The officers are dispatched there because Mr. Lee's wife says, hey, he's gonna go there and he has a gun and he's gonna confront this guy.
When Tony arrived at the gas station, he left his pistol in the glove compartment and started walking toward Travis. But before he could even talk to him, the police arrived and stopped him in his tracks. Since there wasn't an investigation launched yet, the police were unaware of the whole situation, but allowed Tony to talk with Travis for a minute. He then went on to retell his whole story, word for word, in front of the officers, adding a few apologetic comments here and there. Then, he offered his hand to Tony for a handshake.
I stuck my hand out and said, appreciate it. We shook hands. When I shook his hand, it was as if an earthquake was going on under his feet. And it was only in my hand that I could feel it. His arm wasn't shaking, his body wasn't shaking, there was no quiver. I felt that shake, and I looked at him, and I knew that I was shaking the hand of the last person that seen Kenya alive. There's no doubt in my mind. I knew it at that instant.
Even if the investigation hadn't been properly launched yet, the police decided to comply with Tony's request to at least check Travis's van. They didn't find any evidence of a crime, nor anything to take note of, except the strong smell, the smell of bleach.
To the point where when you spray something like on a ceiling, a roof, and you spray it so much it drips down, that's how much bleach he sprayed on this van.
I've watched enough, true crime stories and whatnot, but bleach means something.
Adding the bleach to the distressing handshake from earlier, Tony was now convinced that his daughter didn't survive that night. After leaving Travis and the police, he tried to go home, but he couldn't face his family, all of them more hopeful than the next, while he knew the actual fate of his daughter.
When I needed to let it go, I'd go to my Walmart and I would park way out front and I'd lose it. Hey, gotta go to the store, be back. Go pick up a pack of gum just to show that I had went to the store, but that's where I went because I could not do it in my wife's arms or in my children's presence because I was the rock in all this thing, and I had to maintain that.
With 24 hours to go before the investigation kickoff, Tony decided not to waste any more time and, again, took matters into his own hands. He went looking for her, regardless of how grim what he could find may be.
I went dumpster diving. I was looking in trash cans for her body, up and down the alleys all over her.
He had to keep this a secret, since he couldn't afford to hurt his family even more.
I couldn't tell her. I could not share what I was feeling because that early in would have removed the only thing that right now everybody had. That one thing that everybody had was hope.
The following day, the investigation was finally assigned to a detective, and the news of Kenya's disappearance was made public.
Posters can be seen all over downtown Denver for missing teen Kenya Monye, last seen at the club 24K. She reportedly went to the restroom, left her purse and cell phone behind, and never came back.
Enter Nash Garule, Denver's police veteran detective, cruising in his own custom lowrider cop car. Looking more like a movie character than an actual police officer, Garule didn't lose any more time, sending out the full force of his department.
Everybody got involved in this, and we just sent detectives out looking for video, do canvases, interviewing people. It was kind of a shotgun effect.
And they did find footage of her from a security camera in a nearby apartment complex, but the only information of value they gathered from these tapes was the apparent state of heavy intoxication Kenya seemed to be in. Very strange behavior for a girl who went out dancing often, but barely drank at all.
I absolutely believe 100% that she was sent to date rape drug. because everything that she did in that club that night was against anything that she's ever done before.
The next day, Gurule received an unexpected call from a lady claiming to be Travis's boss. Back at the bakery they worked at, she was looking through her own CCTV footage and noticed something suspicious about him.
She sees him walk into the office after everybody leaves with long cleaning gloves, and he unplugs the recorder, and she just thought that was odd.
The day before he unplugged the security system, he stored one of his coolers inside the bakery freezer, something he had never done before.
He actually unloads the cooler, puts it on a little cart, and it's taped shut with black duct tape, and puts it into the freezer in the bakery. And there's employees walking around.
And his strange behavior didn't stop there. She also noticed how he kept roving around the freezer.
And what caught her as strange is that every time somebody would walk into that cooler, he would walk in after him.
When he went to look inside the unit, the cooler was gone, but he didn't let that disappointment stop him. Instead, he sent a whole team to search the surrounding area.
We find nothing inside the bakery, but we find out back a barrel where things have been freshly burnt.
At this point, Gurule interviewed Travis but didn't have any evidence against him. Even the barrel they found behind the bakery had to be cleared since it had no DNA or fingerprints on it. Since he was a person of interest in the case, the detective got a search warrant and gathered a DNA sample from him, but couldn't link it to anything in their database.
He said, "What do you think of me?" I said, "I think you're a creep. I think you're a jerk. I think you're a monster." He said, "Am I a psychopath or a sociopath?" Maybe he was testing me like I was testing him to see if I would give him an honest answer, and I would.
Later that day, after Gurule had to let him go, Travis appeared on TV. Since the details surrounding the investigation were leaked to the media, moral panic engulfed the city of Denver. With their main suspect under the spotlight, the last thing they would expect him to do was to try and go clear his name on live television.
Monhey disappeared March 31st. Police discovered she had been at a gas station with Forbes 2 miles away later that night. Officers questioned Forbes but didn't call him a suspect until this month. Prosecutors accused him of killing Monhey after persuading her to get into his car.
Tony and Kim gathered their relatives and watched as Travis went on to talk for almost 10 minutes, claiming his innocence to the news reporter.
Since you're a person of interest, let me ask you this. Did you do something with her?
No.
Did you kidnap her?
No.
Did you sexually assault her?
I did not.
She asked him directly, "Did you kill Kenya?"
Did you murder her?
I did not. No.
He lied. It was in his demeanor. It was in his body language. It was all there. He says, "No."
And to add insult to injury, Travis chose to finish the interview by blaming Kenya for whatever happened to her. Tony and his family couldn't believe what they were hearing.
You know, everybody has their own choices, you know, and she chose to walk off with this guy. And I can't blame myself for that. God, I'm sorry. This has been really emotional for me.
And we were all watching, and we lost it. And I wanted to go talk to him about that interview.
But Tony never got the chance to face Travis ever again. After Nash called him back to the station to pass a lie detector test, he tried to flee to Mexico by passing through Austin, Texas. But Gurule took a flight and cut him short in his tracks with another search warrant. He extradited him back to Colorado, but still had no evidence to hold him there. Freed once again, Travis decided to move back to his hometown of Fort Collins, north of Denver.
He was pretty much keeping a low profile. Our detectives go up and say, "Hey, we're watching him. He's a person of interest on our case." They're like, okay, I'll let everybody know. So we pull our surveillance.
1 month later, on the 4th of July, 30-year-old wine company executive Lydia Tillman is enjoying the fireworks show organized by the city. Originally from Fort Collins, she decided to give up a unique opportunity to advance her career in Spain to come back to her hometown to help her critically ill father.
My dad was recently diagnosed with cancer. So one of the reasons I moved back was to take care of him. Ended up quite the opposite.
What was about to happen to Lydia ended up affecting her ability to speak, but it is important to let her tell her own story in her own words.
This is July 5th, 2011. I was walking home from the fireworks in Fort Collins, and a stranger followed me home. He pushed me into my home.
What ensued was one of the worst attacks we have ever had to cover.
What followed was a brutal attack, rape. He tried to kill me. The only reason why he didn't is because of my strength and will.
After it was over, Lydia was knocked out on the floor. Convinced she was dead, her attacker then drenched her body with bleach, set her apartment on fire, and left the building.
Somehow I came to enough to jump out of the second-story window onto concrete. Splat. It really hurt, but I was saving myself, my life.
Despite the late hours, a neighbor noticed the fire and did his best to take action.
We kicked the door in and we're screaming for somebody upstairs. We're just calling for somebody to see if there's somebody in the apartment.
Soon enough, all emergency services were on site. Jacqueline Shackley, the detective assigned to the case, found Lydia behind the building, miraculously still alive.
We found her in the backyard looking awful. She had been beaten severely and she didn't have any clothes on. And she stood up and ran straight to the ambulance and got in the back.
After this, I had a massive stroke. I was totally incapacitated. I couldn't move, speak, think, eat, breathe.
Lydia's sister, Esther Tillman, was the first to arrive at the hospital.
She was unrecognizable. When I first saw her, I couldn't believe it was her. Her jaw was crushed in her eye sockets, and her wrist was broken, shattered, and then she had broken ribs.
On top of that, she had to be put into a medically induced coma because of the stroke, so Shackley was unable to question her. Instead, she followed her instinct and called her colleagues back in Denver.
Friday afternoon, I get home from work and I get a call from a detective, Jacqueline Shackley, from Fort Collins Police, and she tells me a young woman was blitz attacked. The house smelled of bleach and was set on fire.
He did a really good job of cleaning up. He did quite the job with the bleach.
With the crime scene destroyed and Lydia out of commission, Shackley was short on leads, but she remembered that the Denver police warned her about a potential murderer on the loose in Fort Collins.
This possibly could be related. He's wanted for murder and he's in Fort Collins. I don't know, it could be a long shot, but they may want to know about it. So I laid out what had happened, some of the evidence that we had found, and he was silent on the other end of the phone. And then finally he said, "Oh my God."
And I just told her, I said, this is him.
Shackley then sent a forensic team to examine Lydia at the hospital. She didn't have high hopes though, since Lydia has been drenched in bleach after the crime. But in the end, the forensic scientists did find something: unknown DNA.
And the majority of that DNA was under Lydia's fingernails, so no doubt she put up a fight.
She was trying to defend herself.
Yeah.
At this point, Travis was still out there because the police couldn't directly link the DNA to him. They had to wait an entire week before getting their hands on the test results.
It's a long process. It's not like a TV show where they do it in 40 minutes and you have a hit. So I knew it was going to take a while. I just kept praying that it would happen earlier.
Afraid that he may either strike again or try to run away, Detective Shackley sent a handful of officers to survey him.
He's following a girl. He starts talking her up and they're walking together. And police contact him. He gives a false name.
They're like, "This guy's too much of a danger. We got to figure out a way to get him off the street." So they ended up arresting him for false reporting, for giving a false name.
With Travis out of the street, Shackley and Gurule finally had a minute to breathe, but the clock was still ticking. If they couldn't get their hands on the DNA test results, and fast, they would be forced to let him go again.
He was given a bond and was about to bond out like 10:30 on Monday night.
As his release was being processed, the detective finally received the so anticipated call.
It was the biggest adrenaline dump ever, and of course I called Detective Gouret in tears. We did it. He's charged. He's in jail. He's not getting out.
After this, Shackley also informed Tony and his family.
It was always Travis. It validated what I felt after that handshake that night.
But Travis was the least of his concerns. He wanted to find Kenya.
I said, make a deal. Yeah, I don't care what it is. I don't care. You can take it down to manslaughter. I didn't care. Just make a deal. We just want Kenya.
So Shackley visited Travis in jail, but unsurprisingly, the man wasn't cooperating at all.
Obviously, I wanted to talk to him. I wanted to get an interview with him and see if he would tell me something. And he immediately said, "I'm not talking to you. Get out of here."
So Gurule came back to Fort Collins to face Travis once and for all.
He didn't want to talk to any of the detectives, but he always talked to me.
Above all else, Gurule wanted to give closure to Kenya's family, so he tried to talk Travis into a deal from the get-go and asked him what he wanted out of it.
He says, I'll tell you what I did, where her body is, as long as you don't label me a sex offender and you don't give me the death penalty. And I said, you'll tell me everything? He said, yeah. I said, okay.
As you can guess, this was completely unexpected. Gurule himself couldn't believe it at first.
I left the jail, went out to my car, and thought to myself, did I just hear this right, or am I dreaming? I even played the recording back to myself.
The following day, Travis sealed the deal with the district attorney and agreed to deliver Kenya's body to Gurule.
We drive out to the site next to a little grove of trees. He says, she's over there. So we walk over there, and he's standing up on top of the hill, and there's like a little ravine. And he says, you're standing right on top of her.
While the police forensics dug out the body, the detectives returned to Denver to interview Travis one last time before his trial. There, he confessed to Kenya's murder, starting from the beginning after he picked her up that night.
He says that she passed out. He has sex with her while she's asleep. She wakes up, she confronts him, she starts hitting him.
As the fight went on, Travis strangled her, and before he knew it, she was gone, dead, in the back of his van.
So he puts her in the cooler, and then he goes back to the shop where we have him on camera. He unplugs the video. He takes all her clothes off, burns everything, pours bleach on her and cleans her with bleach, puts her back in the van, and then takes her up to Kingsburg where he buries her.
He then also confessed to the assault and rape of Lydia, but before the end of the interview, Travis stood up and approached Gurule.
He says, you just wouldn't give up. And I looked at him and I said, you're right.
As this was happening, the district attorney called Tony to announce to him that they'd found Kenya's body.
It was at that moment that I knew that, okay, they found Kenya, and I needed to get home and let Maria and the kids know before this thing hit the news. So I went out to my truck and I kind of just sat there. I had to control myself before I could go and take away their hope. And I had them, and that. And that was the toughest thing I've ever done.
His family was devastated, but their struggle wasn't over yet. They still needed to attend Travis's sentencing. On the other side of the state, someone else was preparing for this event. Lydia, only 2 days after being discharged from the hospital, wrote down a victim impact statement to be read during the court hearing.
It took me about an hour to write it. And a lot of courage to get up there with my dad, who had to read it because I was non-speaking.
What follows is a word-for-word rendition of that statement.
You caused me no harm. My spirit, my soul, my mind remain untouched. May you find peace in this life.
And to the surprise of everybody in that courtroom, Lydia's father finished reading his daughter's impact statement with these words, "Travis Forbes, I forgive you for what you did to me."
There wasn't a dry eye in that courtroom, including the judge. It's freeing for her, and I understand that. And I did the same, because we're not going to live in that hatred.
Guruli and Tony couldn't believe their ears. Only 3 months after the attack, she truly accomplished the impossible.
She's amazing. To do what she did and to endure what she went through, I couldn't imagine. She's a superhero in my eyes.
What she did during her court proceedings on the day that he was sentenced for what he did to her, the amount of her strength and her will to live.
After the sentencing, Kenya's family finally got the chance to properly meet Lydia, a powerful experience, especially for Kim, Kenya's little sister.
I have nothing but respect for her. She's just such a sweet woman and so strong and positive. When I gave her a hug, I broke down. I don't know, it was weird. I just felt like a connection with Kenya when I was hugging her. It was like almost like I was hugging my sister.
Tony and his family had to go through something infinitely difficult, but he wouldn't let the loss of his daughter stop him from trying to make a difference.
I created a foundation, and then through this foundation, I help families of the missing. Her death has changed a lot of girls' lives. I've gotten phone calls and Facebook messages from all these girls who have changed their lifestyles about what they do, how they do. We are absolutely positive that she has saved lives out there. This is why we do what we do.
And as for Lydia, life isn't always easy, but she's making the most out of it. On top of her own activism, she reconverted herself as a yoga teacher. Even if her attacker left his mark on her, she refuses to let him control her. Instead, she chose to become the antithesis of what he was.
I believe Travis Forbes was acting out of fear and hatred. I choose love and peace over fear. And I won.